Sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Let's get into the episode for today. Welcome back, everyone, to Uprooted Community. I am Omotoke Adewale, licensed marriage and family therapist, bringing you all things faith and mental health through this platform, Uprooted. Thank you so much for joining me again. I know we took like a week or two off from episodes, so give yourself a round of applause for joining again. Today, we're going to jump right in. I wanted to talk about a topic that's just so important that affects our day to day life, right? Whether it's at work, with your family, in your relationships, with your kids, with your friends, wherever you are, even sometimes with yourself, and even also sometimes when it comes to our relationship with God, and that is communication. So, today we're going to talk about the art of communication, some different types of communication, and then also some tips to kind of help you with having better communication with other people. Okay. So we're going to jump right in. I have a scripture. Like I always say, you can find everything in the Bible. Whatever you're looking for, it's there. You just got to look. Okay. So there's a scripture in James 1:19 that says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." If that is not the whole summary of communication, I don't know what is, right? And communication is so important, right? Lack of communication skills and understanding can affect the quality of our relationships, right? So when we have poor quality in our communication skills, it can be a reflection of poor quality relationships, right? So that's why it's so important for us to learn not just how to speak, but also how to listen, to pick up on what's being said, what's not being said, right? Communication is not a formula or a science. It's not this like 1 + 1 = 2 situation. It's more of an art, right? So, what that means is the way that I, as a person, communicate with one person in my life, right, is not going to be the same way I communicate with another person. So, even though I'm the same person and another human being is relating with me, because we're all so different and we're so dynamic, the way in which we communicate with others have to be the same way, right? So communication is an art. It's not a science, and it's a skill that you have to build and develop. Just because you're a human being who's alive and breathing doesn't mean you automatically have good communication skills. It's something you have to learn, just like playing a sport, just like learning a new job skill. It's not something that just comes upon you, right? You have to cultivate it. You have to invest and be intentional in learning how to communicate. Okay. So, um, the amplified, I'm looking at my notes. The amplified of that same scripture, I wanted to read it really quick, is the James 1:19. It says, "Understand this, my beloved brothers and sisters, let everyone be quick to hear, be careful, a thoughtful listener, slow to speak, a speaker of carefully chosen words, and slow to anger." So patient, reflective, and forgiving, right? And that's the amplified version of that James 1:19. I think that's just so important when it says here that we should be careful. We should be thoughtful listeners, right? We should speak carefully and choose our words carefully, right? Sometimes the people who are the loudest are the ones with limited depth, right? And the people who you see that might be more quiet and reflective, they might have a lot to say, right? So it's not, again, what you say is how you say it. And it's also not how much you say, but the quality of what you're saying, right? And in that same vein, there are some barriers that get in the way of us being able to be effective communicators, right? One of the barriers is life experiences. Some of us just don't have experience when it comes to communication, right? Maybe the way we grew up. And another one is culture, right? Culture is another barrier. Maybe the way you grew up, maybe in your household or the environment that you're in, people just don't really know how to effectively communicate. Maybe in your family, everybody's in each other's business, right? So maybe poor or lack of boundaries, people just say whatever they want to say to each other. There is no room for being kind. You might hear things like tough love or harsh love, right? Or maybe you grew up in an environment where words aren't really spoken, right? Everyone lives in their own world. Everyone's pretty isolated, right? That can also impact your ability to effectively communicate, okay? Another one is mentality. Some of us have certain mentalities that get in the way of us being effective communicators, right? That means sometimes some of us are very like self-conscious, right? Maybe you think you don't have anything to say. People won't really value what you have to say. Maybe when you were growing up, you were the one whose voice was often suppressed in your family, right? So when you have this mentality of I'm inferior to people. People don't care what I have to say. People don't want to listen to what I have to say. That can affect your communication skills. Or on the flip side, if you're someone who always wants to be heard, right? So maybe you also grew up in the same type of environment where people didn't value your opinion. You might be someone who wants to like say a lot, right? Who wants to command a room and command a presence, right? Or you feel like other people's opinions don't really matter, right? You feel like your opinion is like the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, right? You feel like your opinion is what everyone has to take. Sometimes that mentality too can get in the way of you being able to effectively communicate with other people around you, okay? So we have life experiences, we have culture, we have mentality, okay? We also have ignorance, right? Some of us just don't know. And you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't, again, have the knowledge or the skills or the information or resources to access having effective communication, then that can get in the way of you being able to effectively communicate, right? And then the last one, like I mentioned earlier, is self esteem. So arrogance, pride, low self esteem, and just like a lack of self awareness, right? The level at which we're able to have effective communication with other people is the level of self awareness that we have. So it kind of mirrors each other. So if I'm someone who's not very self aware, if I don't kind of know my left from my right, know my own personal feelings or opinions, or have gathered my own thoughts and feelings about a particular thing, I cannot come to another person now and try to have communication or speak to them or have conversation. So that means we need to have a level of self awareness when it comes to effective communication. Okay. So I'll go over those one more time. So it's barriers to effective communication. That's life experiences, culture, mentality, ignorance, and self esteem. Okay. So I want to go over three types of communication. So obviously, this topic is very vast. So what that means is that I'm not going to be able to cover all there is to cover about communication in this short episode. So if you have questions or resources, I'll also link some. If you're interested, just let me know and I'll send it your way, right? But for the time being, though, I want to talk about three types of communication. And this is something that I, teach when it comes to therapy or clinical work. I do classes on this. I talk to people one on one about this. So this is something that can help you in all areas of your life, right? When it comes to your workplace, when it comes to your home life with your family, when it comes to your relationships with friends or partners, when it comes to your kids, right? It's so important that parents teach their kids communication skills. And that starts with you knowing communication skills and being able to be a leader by example, right? So it's not this do as I say, it's more do as I do, right? So I'm going to go over three types of communication styles, all right? So the first one is passive communication, okay? So in passive communication, the person prioritizes the needs, wants, and feelings of other people, even if it's at their own expense, at their own detriment, right? They do not believe that they can express their needs or their wants, and they don't stand up for it, right? And they also can be taken advantage of because of this. So they mean well, however, they feel inferior to other people, right? So this person might look soft spoken, quiet. They allow other people to take advantage of them, prioritize the needs of others, poor eye contact, looking away, does not express their needs or wants, and they lack confidence. Now, I do want to put a little caveat to this. Anytime I teach this class or talk to clients about this, I put a caveat of culture, right? So because everybody's culture is different when it comes to how we present ourselves, how we talk to people, it's very important to know that what might look like passive communication in one culture might actually be respectful and assertive, right? So you want to tailor this to your own life experience, and you want to tailor it to the culture in which you identify with, right? So maybe in my culture, for example, I can't look at somebody who's older in the eyes, right? Maybe that's seen as disrespectful, okay? So it doesn't mean though that I'm being passive, right? But I am tailoring the way that I communicate within my culture. Okay. So you can do the same thing when it comes to your workplace as well. So tailoring it to your workplace culture or your workplace environment. Okay. Okay, so that's passive. The next one is aggressive. So you can probably guess what this means. This person expresses that only their needs and only their needs matter, right? They don't care about the other person's needs, they don't want to hear it. And they often will be labeled as bullies, right? They're the person who's talking over people, they're the person who is not respecting other people's opinions, right? So they're easily frustrated, they speak in loud or overbearing ways. They're unwilling to compromise. And they use criticism, humiliation, and domination when it comes to talking with other people or relating with other people. And they also can be disrespectful, right? They frequently interrupt as well. So, this is aggressive communication. Maybe you've been around somebody who communicates in this way. And I do also want to add this caveat that most of us fall into these three categories that I'm going to mention in some way, shape, or form, right? So, for example, I can be a passive communicator when it comes to my family, right? But maybe at work, I'm more in the aggressive or assertive, right? And vice versa. So, it's very important to start to pick up your own personal communication style, your own personal communication patterns, so you can see where you fall when it comes to your different relationships, right? All of us sometimes can be aggressive in our communication. All of us sometimes can be passive. All of us can sometimes be assertive or a mixture of all three, right? However, you do tend to have a communication pattern, which is the pattern or style in which you often communicate across your different relationships, okay? So while we all fall into those three categories, we all also have a particular pattern or style that we often communicate in. Okay, so I just wanted to say that. So that's aggressive. All right. And the last one is assertive communication. Okay, so this type of communication emphasizes both people's needs, both people's wants and feelings, right? So they're able to compromise, they're able to listen as well as speak. Okay. This person listens without interruption, they clearly state what they want and need. They're willing to compromise. They stand up for their own rights, right? They have a confident tone and body language, and they also have good eye contact, okay? So it's very important to note that you can validate another person's feelings and experiences without invalidating your own, right? Some people tend to think that if I validate another person, that means that I'm invalidating myself, right? Two things can exist at the same time. So I can validate you, right? But it doesn't mean that I agree with you. It doesn't mean that I see things from your perspective per se. However, I can do it in a way that it doesn't put you down, it doesn't criticize you. And I can also still own my own feelings and my own needs and wants. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. So assertive kind of carries both people's experiences together, right? So again, passive is more whatever you want. These are the people that you might call people pleasers. To be honest, I used to be president of that club. Okay. I've since retired and stepped down. However, sometimes I'll be honest, I still pick up per diem shifts, but for the most part, I've retired from being a people pleaser. And when it comes to people pleasing, you know, a lot of the things that people don't realize is that people pleasing actually is a hard pill to swallow, but it can be a form of manipulation, right? Because you're constantly shape shifting, code switching, whatever the word is, right? To fit your environment or the person that you're around, right? Because you're wanting to be accepted, you're wanting to be loved, you're wanting some type of validation from them, right? So you're often like a professional, like shapeshifter, right? If you're a people pleaser. And one thing I've learned from my own personal experience and work is that when it comes to people pleasing, it doesn't help anyone, right? It doesn't help me, right? Because resentment can build and the other person doesn't actually know how I feel or what I'm thinking or what it is that I, desire or just whatever it is, right? They're not experiencing the authentic me, so to speak, right? And then at the same time, it also doesn't help me because then I'm not being my authentic self, right? So one thing I've learned is that, and I've accepted is that not everybody's for me and I'm not for everyone. And that's okay. Okay. So when it comes to passive communication, a lot of the times people pleasers fall into that category. Okay. So we have passive, aggressive, and assertive. So start to think about where you fall when it comes to these three categories, right? I want you to think about specifically your workplace, right? What type of communication do you often fall into when it comes to the workplace? I also want you to think about your home life. So you can think about with your partner, with your kids, with your friends, right? When it comes to your personal life, also with your parents, right? I think, especially as adults, the relationship that we have or don't have or whatever with our parents, it really can like impact our communication with them, right? So maybe growing up, you were more passive with your parent, and now maybe it's turned into like passive aggressive or a little bit more assertive, and they're seeing it as aggressive. And that's another thing to note. Sometimes when we're operating in some of these categories, especially with assertive, sometimes people might take it a different way, right? Especially if you're starting to set boundaries or communicate in a different way than what they're used to. So maybe you are often passive and now you've learned maybe through therapy or through different avenues that okay, I can actually be more assertive. And that person might actually see it as aggressive, right? So we also want to remember this as well, that we cannot control how other people perceive the way in which we are communicating, right? However, whatever meaning they put to it, you can only control yourself and the way in which you learn how to communicate, right? So it does take two people to have effective communication. However, it doesn't mean that you cannot do what you can on your own side of the street, so to speak, to make sure that you are practicing like assertive communication. That was a mouthful, but I hope you all get what I'm saying. Okay, so that was the three types, and then I'm gonna end with some just basic starter kind of communication tips that you can utilize again in your relationships, in your workplace, wherever you find yourself. Okay, so the first one is active listening and reflection. Right, a lot of people, a lot of human beings, I've come to realize we're actually, and myself included, I'm guilty of this sometimes. Even though I'm a therapist, I'm guilty of this, especially in my personal relationships. We're not good listeners. We often hear and listen to respond. We're actually not really taking in what the person is saying. And the way that you know that, you would know that you're doing that is if somebody's speaking and you are thinking of your response. That's how you know that you're not listening to listen. You're actually listening to respond. But if a person's speaking and you are just hearing the words that they're saying, you're paying attention to how they're saying it, you're listening. But if you're hearing them and you're like, okay, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to respond in this way, oh, actually, what they're saying, I don't agree with that. You're not actually listening to listen, right? So active listening is being an active participant in the exchange of conversation with somebody, right? And then reflection is being able to elicit back to them what you're hearing them say, right? You often will see therapists do this, right? So we'll say things like, what I'm hearing you say is, it sounds like, right? So we're not repeating back, we're not parroting what you're saying. So let's say the person says, I feel overwhelmed. You can say, you feel overwhelmed. That's just repeating back what they're saying, right? And it can be frustrating if somebody's just repeating back what you're saying. However, you can say something like, it sounds like you're saying you feel overwhelmed. It sounds like you're saying that work has been challenging for you right now. You see how that's a little bit different? So you want to reflect back to them what they're saying. And when you do that, it allows a person to feel like you're listening to them, right? And then they're able to share more. Okay. The second is I statements. This is a really big one when it comes especially to like conflict resolution in our communication. I can do another episode on conflict resolution. another time. But I statements are when you just speak from your own experience, right? You're not telling a person what they should be doing, how they should be doing it, how they, how their behaviors, right, is making you feel a certain way, right? Because what we don't often realize is that people cannot make you feel anything. They can trigger certain feelings and emotions, but no one can make you feel something, right? So I can't say this person made me angry, right? Maybe their actions or the way you behaved, right? Or you can say something like, I feel angry because you X, Y, and Z, right? Or I feel angry because this and this happened versus you're making me angry or you're pissing me off and all the things, right? So we want to speak from our own experience. We want to use I statements. I feel this because of this, right? Versus you're doing this or you should do this, okay? And another communication tip or skill that I'll kind of plug in here, I don't have too much time to like go into the whole thing, but it's something called DEARMAN, and it's from DBT. So DBT is a treatment model that we utilize in therapy, and it stands for dialectical behavior therapy. And it's a really good treatment model when it comes to interpersonal effectiveness, communication, emotion regulation. So if any of those things are something that you're interested in, I highly recommend looking into DBT and practicing the Dear Man. So the words or the letters Dear Man stands for different words that you can utilize when it comes to communicating to whoever it is that you're trying to communicate to. Okay. The next tip is for us to learn how to apologize, take responsibility and accountability. Some of us just don't. We're not humble enough, right? We have a lot of pride when it comes to just being able to say, you know what, I was wrong, right? I can take responsibility for my actions and I can, be able to communicate how I can do it differently or better next time versus being defensive, versus, not taking accountability. And a lot of the times, like they say, the best apology is changed behavior, right? So you don't want to just say, I'm sorry, right? But what is it that you are taking responsibility for? This can really help your communication with other people, and it can also help your relationships, right? And I also, for some reason, I feel like I need to say this to parents, especially learning how to apologize to your kids, right? It doesn't make you a less than, it doesn't make you not the parent. Your position as the parent stands. It doesn't change just because you apologize, right? So learn how to apologize to people, to your kids, to your partners, to your friends, to people at work. Just learn to take responsibility and accountability, right? Even if you mean well, right? Like I said at the beginning of the episode, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So intent doesn't eradicate harm, right? So we can mean well, but it doesn't mean it landed well with that person. And you can just take responsibility for your actions and how it impacted them, right? Not necessarily like, oh, I'm sorry that you're mad, right? I'm sorry that, that just upset you. No, I can see how maybe what I said might have triggered this for you, right? I take responsibility for that. This is what I meant, right? Versus just being like, I'm sorry you felt that way. That's not an apology, right? So we want to learn how to apologize. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we want to learn how to be humble, right? A lot of us don't want to, one, hear from other people and learn from other people, right? Part of communication being an art is being open to learning, being open to seeing different perspectives, being open to seeing different ideas. And one of the best ways to experience a new perspective is in relationship, right? Because that other person lives, you live in the same world, but the way they operate in the world is different than yours, right? So one of the best ways to be able to gain a new perspective is to be humble and to learn from another person, no matter how young or old, right? We can always learn from each other, okay? That is part of communication being an art. And then the next one is empathy, right? So we want to be able to have empathy for other people, for their experiences, to try to put yourself in their shoes, right? So they describe empathy as if you picture somebody being in a hole, right? I think it was Brene Brown that described it like this. Sympathy is oh, hey, I see you down there in that hole. I'm so sorry that you're there. That really sucks, that you're down there. I hope you can get out soon, right? That really sucks. Empathy, right? It can be two ways. Empathy can be getting into the hole with them and you figure out a way to get out together, right? Or it can be you remembering the time that you've been in a similar position. You've also been in that hole before, right? And you're able to offer ideas, right? Of, oh, this is what you can do. This is how you can get out of it. I see you. You got this, right? You can get out of this because I did, right? That's empathy, being able to relate to another person's experience from a personal level, okay? And then the next one is a really, really important one, which is curiosity. This will go such a long way in our relationships. A lot of the times when we have a disagreement with someone, when we're having communication challenges, if we can just take a moment to say, I wonder what your perspective is on this. I wonder how you feel about this versus you must not care or assuming the person doesn't care because of what you think or how you think they're responding, right? So we want to utilize curiosity, right? So rather than accusing somebody of something, rather than jump into conclusions, asking them questions, right? So let's say, for example, your partner, right, often is late, okay? Rather than saying something like, or getting upset, which you're rightfully so, you can be upset, rather than being like, you're always late. This just means that you don't care. You're so inconsiderate, and kind of just getting into like attack and defense mode, approaching it with curiosity. Hey, I wonder what's getting in the way of you like being able to be here on time. Like, what are some things that you're doing to kind of help you to be on time? Because I noticed that every time we make plans, you're late. Like, what's going on, right? You see how that's kind of like more open versus this is so frustrating, and just kind of like attacking the person, right? So curiosity, you can utilize that with in your workplace, with people who are difficult, at work. You can utilize it with your family members versus, again, just like attacking, just coming at them with curiosity. I wonder, right? What is this like for you? What have you tried, right? Curiosity. Okay. And the last one is be open to feedback and observations. Okay. Some of us, again, we don't want to hear people's feedback. We don't want to hear people's opinions about us. Everybody has a blind spot, right? So there are things about myself that I'm not going to see that other people in my life will see, and vice versa. And it's okay for us to be open to feedback, right? That's going to help your relationships with other people, and it's going to help your communication with them, right? But I do want to add the caveat of looking at the source, right? So making sure whoever you're getting feedback from is a reliable source, right? And a lot of the times, our friends, our family members, our partners, those are reliable sources, right? Even sometimes people at work. So you want to consider the source when you are taking feedback, but the point is to be open to feedback, okay? So that was a lot of information I realized when it comes to communication. So please do let me know if there's anything I talked about today that stands out to you, that you have more questions on, that you want me to expand upon, or that you just resonate with, right? Just share your comments, share your thoughts and your opinions. I know I went through a lot of different things with the communication styles and patterns, the barriers, the different tips that you can utilize. So it was a lot of information, but I do hope that it was helpful information for you. Okay. So let me know what category you fall in. Are you passive? Are you aggressive? Are you assertive? What have been some of the barriers that have been in your way when it comes to communication? And which of those tips do you currently use or that you would like to use? So please do share it with me. Okay. All right. So let's jump into our closing quote for the day. This one is a really good one. I found it online. And I think it really captures what we talked about today, and it captures communication really well. So it says, communication is a skill that you can learn. It's like riding a bike or typing. If you're willing to work at it, you can rapidly improve the quality of every part of your life. So, communication is a skill to learn. So, good job to you. Good work today. Well done for tuning into this episode, for listening this whole time, because this is how you gain skills, right? By listening, by looking into resources, by watching this episode, right? By listening to this episode, this is going to help you with gaining some of those communication skills. So you're already doing the work. So good job. Pat yourself on the back. All right. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share the episode. Don't be stingy. If you got something out of this, share with somebody else that you feel like can learn from when it comes to communication, right? So share it, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and don't forget to share all of your comments and feedback with me. Okay. Thank you all so much again. Until we meet again, continue to be well, do well, and live well.